Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to completely flip the script on what it means to be a captivating conversationalist. We usually think of great conversation as, having the perfect anecdote, being incredibly witty, or just dominating the room with a charismatic presence. But today, based on some truly fascinating source material, we're going to explore how the absolute best way to win people over might just require you to close your mouth and open your ears.
So, how exactly do you become a brilliant conversationalist without saying a word? It sounds completely impossible, right? I mean, how do you leave a lasting impression of being a great talker when you barely even speak? Well, let's dive into this counterintuitive question, because the answer lies in shifting our focus entirely away from ourselves.
To see how this works in practice, let's look at a fascinating little anecdote right out of our source material. The author is at a bridge party, and he sits next to a woman who knows he's traveled all over the world. She immediately says, "Oh, I do want you to tell me about all the wonderful places you have visited." But noticing she had just returned from a trip to Africa, the author pivots. He exclaims how much he'd always wanted to see Africa and simply asks her to tell him all about her trip instead.
And guess what happened? For the next 45 minutes, she talked endlessly. And here's the kicker. As the text highlights, she never once asked him where he had been or what he had seen. Actually, scratch that. She didn't want to hear him talk about his travels at all. All she really wanted was an interested listener so she could expand her own ego and talk about herself.
This totally wasn't an isolated incident either. Our author shares a similar experience at a dinner party where he was seated near a distinguished botanist. The author was genuinely fascinated. He literally sat on the edge of his chair and listened in rapt silence for hours as the botanist spoke of exotic plants, indoor gardens, and, believe it or not, the humble potato.
Now, this brilliantly illustrates the absolute magic of this approach. At the end of the night, having barely spoken a word himself, the author left. The botanist then turned to the host and just showered the author with compliments, calling him a most interesting conversationalist. The author hadn't been an interesting talker. He had simply offered the incredible implied flattery of rapt attention. He had been a masterful listener.
Section 1. Winning over angry customers. Let's see how this principle builds into the high-stakes world of business and de-escalation. Picture this. A customer in a Chicago department store brings back a coat purchased on a special sale because it had a torn lining. The first clerk she met interrupted her, completely refused to listen, and just pointed at an all sales final sign. The customer was absolutely furious and about to leave forever. But then a manager stepped in and completely changed the dynamic. By listening attentively to the whole story first and then offering a repair or a refund, the manager saved a high-paying, loyal account simply by letting the customer be heard.
We see this exact same psychology at play with what the text calls the chronic kicker. The absolute worst-case scenario, violently angry critic. The New York Telephone Company once had to deal with one of the most vicious, raving customers imaginable. We're talking about a guy who cursed representatives, threatened to tear phones out by the roots, and filed countless complaints. So how did they actually solve it? Well, they sent in a skilled troubleshooter. Step 1, the customer raved. Step 2, the representative literally just listened and sympathized for nearly 3 hours. He returned for a total of 4 visits, just listening. The result? By the 4th visit, the customer paid all his bills in full and voluntarily withdrew his complaints. The guy thought he was a holy crusader, but all he really wanted was a feeling of importance. Once he got it from a sympathetic listener, those imagined grievances just vanished.
Julian F. Detmer, who founded a major woolen company, used this exact same timeline to turn an enemy into a friend. An angry customer traveled all the way to Chicago just to tell Detmer he would never, ever pay a disputed bill. Detmer just sat back and let the man talk himself out. When the man finally calmed down, Detmer thanked him for coming, forgave the bill entirely, and took him to lunch. The customer returned home, placed a massive order, and remained a loyal friend for 22 years. Talk about a return on investment.
Section 2. Strengthening personal bonds. Let's step away from the business world for a second. The crucial point here is that listening isn't just a corporate strategy. It is literally the glue holding our intimate relationships together. Take Millie Esposito of New York. She made it a point to always stop whatever she was doing to listen to her children. One day, her son Robert said, "Mom, I know that you love me very much." When she asked why, he didn't point to toys or food. He said, "Because whenever I want to talk to you about something, you stop whatever you are doing and listen to me." That kind of concentrated attention, that's the ultimate expression of love.
Section 3. Lessons from historical greats. Let's zoom out to the broader scope of history and see how prominent figures harnessed this power.
Former Harvard president Charles W. Eliot was a total master of this, demonstrating that successful listening isn't just being quietly passive, it's a highly physical activity. He would sit very erect, give exclusive attention, and, as observers noted, he seemed to be hearing with his eyes as well as his ears. The person speaking felt entirely, 100% heard.
Even Abraham Lincoln relied on this, right in the middle of the darkest, most stressful hours of the Civil War. He actually wrote to an old friend in Springfield, Illinois, asking him to come to Washington. When the friend arrived, Lincoln talked to him for hours about the advisability of issuing a proclamation freeing the slaves, weighing all the arguments for and against.
Now here's the absolute kicker. After talking for hours, Lincoln just shook his old neighbor's hand, said goodnight, and sent him back to Illinois without ever asking for his opinion. Lincoln didn't want advice. He just needed a sympathetic ear to clarify his own mind and unburden himself. It just goes to show that even the greatest leaders sometimes desperately need an audience.
Sigmund Freud was also famously gifted at this. People who actually met him described his manner of listening as having just unprecedented concentration. He didn't use a piercing gaze, his eyes were mild and genial, but the extraordinary attention he gave and his deep appreciation for what the speaker said made people feel incredibly valued. As one person put it, "You've no idea what it meant to be listened to like that."
Section 4. The ultimate principle. So, we've seen how powerful active listening is, right?
But how do we stop getting in our own way? Well, the source material offers a pretty stark warning. Dr. Nicholas Murray Butler, the longtime president of Columbia University, states it incredibly bluntly. People who talk only of themselves think only of themselves. They are hopelessly uneducated. The text warns us that people intoxicated with their own egos and their sense of importance are, quite frankly, just bores. If you constantly interrupt and talk incessantly about yourself, people are going to shun you.
So, the absolute secret formula to being a brilliant conversationalist, the complete opposite of being a bore, really just boils down to 5 simple words. To be interesting, be interested. You have to ask questions that other persons will enjoy answering. You have to actively encourage them to talk about themselves and their accomplishments.
Which brings us right to the core takeaway from our explainer today. Highlighted in our source text is Principle 4, be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. This is the absolute foundation of making people feel important, valued, and understood. And look, if you ever find yourself forgetting this principle, just remember this somewhat harsh reality of human nature. The person you are talking to is 100 times more interested in themselves, their wants, and their problems than they are in you and your problems. As the author points out, a person's own toothache means more to that person than a famine in a distant country that kills 1 million people. It sounds crazy, but it's true. We are all the main characters in our own stories. So, I'm going to leave you with this. Think about the people you interact with daily. Your colleagues, your customers, your family. Who in your life just needs an audience today? The next time you start a conversation, will you try to dazzle them with your words, or will you offer them the irresistible, magnetic flattery of your rapt attention? Give it a try today and watch how quickly you become the most interesting conversationalist in the room.